Today's presentation is part 2 in our 2-part series on FDA inspections and is titled Managing Challenging Inspections and Things Never to Say to an Investigator. I'm Courtney Stevens, an attorney in Medmarc's Risk Management Department. On behalf of Medmarc and today's presenter, Stephen Niedelman, thank you for joining us. Steve serves as the lead quality systems and compliance consultant to the FDA and life sciences practice team at King & Spalding, specializing in regulatory enforcement and policy matters involving industries regulated by the U.S. Food and Drug Administration. He provides strategic advice, insight, and guidance to the medical device, pharmaceutical, biologics, and food industries to ensure compliance with the requirements of the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act. He joins King & Spalding from Crowell & Moring, where he was a senior consultant in its healthcare group. Previously, he was Executive Vice President of Quintiles Consulting. Steve consults with manufacturers, importers, new product developers, as well as with firms involved in or facing enforcement actions. He helps firms develop corrective actions plans so their business needs are properly balanced with regulatory requirements in order to achieve compliance without compromising objectives. He provides training and guidance to industry professionals on all FDA requirements, including quality system requirements, inspection preparedness, post-market obligations, and to executives about their management responsibilities, as well as FDA's expectations. He retired from the Food and Drug Administration in 2006 after a 34-year distinguished career where he served as the Deputy Associate Commissioner for Regulatory Affairs and as Chief Operating Officer of the Office of Regulatory Affairs. He ensured consistent interpretation of FDA's regulatory policies by directly overseeing offices at the headquarters of the Office of Regulatory Affairs, ORA, including the Office of Regional Operations, Office of Enforcement, and Office of Criminal Investigations. Additionally, he assisted in the day-to-day management of FDA's nearly 3,400 field staff responsible for investigative and laboratory operations. Before joining the Office of Enforcement, Steve spent nearly 24 years throughout the Office of Compliance at the Center for Devices and Radiological Health in a number of management positions. During those nearly 24 years at CDRH, he was responsible for implementing many of the newly created statutory requirements and drafting and shaping many of the regulations and policies affecting the sale, distribution, and promotion of medical devices. He began his FDA career in 1972 as an investigator in FDA's New York District Office. We are very pleased to have him join us today. With that, I am happy to turn things over to Steve, who will begin today's presentation.
Thank you, Courtney, and welcome everybody. We all are faced with FDA inspections from time to time, hopefully fewer than more often. And often these inspections are unannounced. Sometimes they are pre-announced. But in any event, we always need to be prepared for those days when FDA will show up at our doorstep, flash their badge and credentials, and ask to do an inspection. Sometimes during those inspections, we're challenged with some difficult situations that require some thinking on our feet, some challenging situations that may feel like placing you in an awkward situation in being upfront with investigators, sometimes dealing with some rogue investigators who are really just pushing the envelope beyond what the agency anticipates from their role. So today we're going to talk about FDA's authority and approach to inspections. We're going to talk briefly about how to be inspection ready and know what you need to be ready with versus what FDA may be asking for. How to deal with those difficult situations that have arisen, and every one of the ones that I will be describing have in fact taken place. They're real. And then 20 things never to say to an investigator, sort of tips on some things that you should think about as you speak to investigators that might typically roll off your tongue that you might want to think twice about before speaking with them. So it's important to understand FDA's inspectional authority and approach. It's important for you to understand what they're entitled to and what they're not entitled to. For example, they're entitled to know basically where you stand in the marketplace as far as are you a major player, do you have 60% of the market, what's your volume of business, but they're not entitled to any specific financial data, for example, such as profits and loss, personnel information other than qualifications to fulfill positions. They're not entitled to a person's address, salary, or anything along those lines, but are entitled to the person's educational background, skills, and abilities. So it's important that you know what the scope of what you do need to share and politely refuse what you don't need to share. So FDA's definition of an inspection is a careful, critical, official examination of a facility to determine its compliance with laws. Inspections may lead to obtain evidence to support legal actions when violations are found. Understand that FDA is not only a public health agency, but it as well as a law enforcement agency. Their mission is to get new and safe and effective products to market as quickly and efficiently as possible, but they're also responsible to assure that they're manufactured correctly and that all the laws and regulations associated with producing those products, developing those products, and assuring that the data used to support those products have lawfully been collected, they're accurate, and that the laws and regulations and guidances have been followed to assure that those claims to safety and efficacy can be supported. So FDA investigators are dispersed throughout the FDA field organization, which was just recently realigned. Depending upon your program area, there will be 2 biologics divisions, there will be 3 device divisions, 4 pharmaceutical divisions, 12 food and veterinary feed divisions, which also includes cosmetics, 2 bioresearch monitoring divisions, and 5 enforcement and import divisions, which sort of is going to be somewhat of a challenge initially, and you know, that's not the purpose of this webinar, but the same investigators that were out there in the past have now been dedicated to certain program areas. And again, this is all part of the program alignment initiative that was undertaken by FDA starting in 2013. But what's most important is you need to be prepared to how to deal with these investigators. Some are very slow and methodical in their approach, so slow that you want to feed them answers before they finish their questions, and they're hoping you do so. There are some that are very rapid-fire questions. That was sort of the way I used to do it, where you didn't even have a chance to answer question 1 when I was on question 3. With the intent sometimes to create some confusion. And then there's the slow Columbo approach of befriending you so you'll share information freely. You become comfortable with these people. You start sharing information that you probably shouldn't have. And they will then in turn use that information at some point. Remember, nothing you share with an investigator is off the record. It might not appear on your 483, but invariably it may appear in the inspection report that memorializes the inspection. So these investigators do have a wide range of personalities. They have a wide range of knowledge levels, different sweet spots. And as I mentioned, you can expect to see different investigators at your site during this rollout of program alignment. Investigators will be traveling more extensively to conduct their inspections as the district office alignments have changed. The investigators will still be situated in their original district offices. They're not being relocated, but they will need to travel further distances to conduct inspections. The expectation, and I can tell you as a former Deputy Associate Commissioner for Regulatory Affairs responsible for investigations, is that these investigators are to be treating you very professionally. They expect the same in return. They're to treat people with respect. They are to interact courteously. They are not to be overly aggressive, and when problems do arise, the agency really does want to know about it, although I always understand that industry is concerned about retaliation. 99.9% of inspections are conducted as expected. I can tell you that for the most part, we, in the role I currently am in, get very, very few complaints, but when we do get them, we encourage firms to make the agency aware of those. And admittedly, there are a number of rogue investigators out there who try to push the envelope. There's the concern about retribution is, based upon my experience, is if anything, the agency will bend over backwards to assure no retribution takes place. They want people to be honest. They want them to be forthcoming. They don't want them to fear that retribution, although I understand that it's automatically a nervous response that will be there. So how do you be inspection ready? It's important to have an audit SOP prepared at your firm. Everybody should know what their roles are. starting from the security guard or receptionist that may receive an FDA investigator who will flash a badge and doesn't get nervous as to who they need to call, how they do a call-down list, make sure people who are in the loop are aware there's an FDA inspection going on. Some firms have an announcement with a rogue name associated with it so people know FDA is on site. Need to identify who's going to be part of your greeting team, who's going to be responsible to notify top management, management representatives, support staff, and IT, especially IT, regarding the arrival of the investigator. Make sure your conference rooms, your audit rooms that are identified as audit rooms are ready and prepared. There may be meetings taking place in there that need to be terminated immediately. Whiteboards need to be wiped down. Take photographs before you wipe them down. Make sure there's no information on those walls or in those rooms that you wouldn't want FDA to see. The SOP should instruct that the investigator be escorted at all times. Ensure that there's a scribe present during the front room investigations. Sometimes there are multiple screens. You may need to have more than one scribe. And that includes walkthrough tours. Make sure that you capture any comments that are made during those tours. Sign the investigator in and out. This is generally the job of the management representative. And make sure that's done on a daily basis. Make sure you try to accommodate them with regard to wireless connections, if there are any at your firm, coffee, local restaurants that are available, etc. They are not permitted to take meals. They are not permitted for anything other than what would ordinarily be available to the rest of the staff at your firm. So in order to stay prepared for this, and I've done this and find it very useful, it's important for you to occasionally conduct a mock audit, have somebody come in and portray themselves as an investigator, and see if everybody is ready, that they practiced enough, that this process goes smoothly, because often investigators don't show up more often than every 2, 3, or 4 years, and it's important to keep this fine-tuned so that when they do show up, you don't thumper, and everybody knows their role and are ready to do things. Not only that, there's a lot of turnover at firms, and so people who had been doing it in the past may no longer be there, and they need to practice as well. In anticipation of audits, you should conduct subject matter experts. You should have identified all SMEs in all areas of the quality system. For each CAPA, somebody who can speak to that CAPA. Why was it open? How was it handled? What was the root cause? What was the outcome? What was its effectiveness? Was it to address a past open CAPA? And you need to really challenge that SME with rigorous questions. Sometimes open-ended questions that they wouldn't even think would be possibly asked of them, that are sometimes so simple that they think past of it. Not everyone is good at being audit-facing. My experience, and I do a lot of SME prep, is sometimes the smartest person who you think is your A person really isn't. They come across as so smart and arrogant that they don't do your firm any service in portraying an image that you would want portrayed to FDA. I've literally had some of the smartest people ask, "That's the stupidest question I've ever heard," and that's really not a good situation to be in. When I've seen it also happen to FDA investigators. Every firm should have an up-to-date opening presentation, a corporate overview, including related firms, where your firm stands in that corporate overview. Make sure your tables of organizations are up to date. Like I mentioned, people change, organizational structures change. Make sure these charts are up to date. Make sure Human Resources maintains a current chart that's available. Provide a site map of the facility, a list and photos of demos of devices that are being made. This is especially useful. Understand FDA, and even if FDA investigators show up with a reviewer, have probably never seen a real device. They look at things on paper. They look at paper reviews. Having a real device and being able to point to a particular problem area or point to a particular component. The old adage, a picture is worth 1,000 words, really helps during an inspection. because it helps them understand much better what the situations are that they're dealing with or that you're dealing with. You should be very upfront about your policies, your corporate policies on the ability to take photographs. We never recommend that you sign any affidavits or that you provide access to ERP systems, electronic documents. More and more investigators are asking for electronic documents on CD-ROMs or jump drives, but they should not have access to any electronic databases at your firm. And then, similarly, many firms are using off-site record storage for archived records, paper records. Make sure the investigator knows that those records that are stored off-site will not be as readily available as those that are available electronically. And for those that do archive off-site, I would freshly look at your contracts. For those that have contracted that they have to retrieve records in 5 to 10 days, that's not going to be deemed acceptable from an FDA perspective. During an inspection, they should have records to you within two days at the most, sooner if possible, so that they can start being reviewed. If you were in the pharmaceutical area, that could be considered a delay or postponement of inspection, and that would not be putting you in a good light from an FDA perspective. Most firms have a front room and a back room for their inspections, the front room being the audit-facing room or rooms if there are multiple streams. Sometimes those multiple streams request to be in the same room. I always suggest that your quality policy be conspicuously displayed. Like as a reminder, as I mentioned before, remove all the extraneous material, anything on whiteboards, blackboards, posters that may be about new product development, et cetera, that they be removed. Again, more than one audit stream is possible. And make sure there's a clean PC available for investigators and only upload information requested. Do not give them a PC where they have access to your email system, to your ERP system, to your records, to your documents. You only upload what they ask for if they need to review it on that PC. Do not allow access to any other system on your corporate system. Again, a clean PC is really critical. The back room is really the glue that keeps an inspection going and the success of an inspection. Nothing should come into the front room that hasn't cleared through the back room. They provide all the inspectional support, the source for all documentation. SMEs should go through the back room before going to the front room to find out what the nature of the context of the conversation that's going on, what are the issues that are being discussed, do they need to be brushed up on any new or novel discussions that have been going on. All documents need to be reviewed for completeness and appropriateness. Make sure you're sending the documents that will be responsive to the FDA's questions. They are the ones who are also responsible for initiating requests from off-site locations and monitoring their progress in getting them retrieved. You should be maintaining a duplicate set of records of everything that you provide FDA, and anything that's sent into the front room should be captured in a duplicate copy in the back room with a cover sheet as to what the request was. If there are multiple audit streams, you need to, or suggest that you do, use different color paper so that you know which investigator asked which questions, and it enables you to reconstruct the inspection if necessary. All requests should be logged, time-stamped, and tracked until fulfilled, and particular attention should be paid to the amount of time it's taken to fulfill those requests. Sometimes the investigator will comment that I'm still waiting for such and such and such and such, and they've been ready. The opportunities haven't been available to introduce them back to the investigator. So many times you're going to be asked to deal with some challenging situations, some of which happen more frequently than others, and some have certainly been unique, but they're not uncommon. The first one is an investigator arrives at your U.S. facility on December 26th, the day after Christmas, for an unannounced inspection and is upset because all of the firm's personnel are unavailable that day to immediately start the inspection. How do you respond and what actions do you take? So as you think about that for a moment, we're talking about the day after Christmas, and if you're open for business, you're expected to be able to host an inspection. The fact that it's an unannounced device inspection, and only the device commodities get pre-announced inspections, I might add. The fact that it's an unannounced inspection means that there's an issue of concern that the agency has raised that they feel the need to come into your firm unannounced. You need to have somebody in charge at your firm, and there should be a skeleton staff. You can easily ask the investigator to please be patient as you retrieve people, but you need to know where your management staff is, where the appropriate leadership is, because if they need to be called in or their alternates need to be called in, they really need to do so. If you're shut down, however, for Christmas break, if you're out of business and not operating, and perhaps just performing routine maintenance during that period, then you're closed and you're no longer operating in accordance with how the statute portrays their ability to inspect your firm. So you really need to decide, if you're going to be open for business, that you have the ability to entertain an audit pretty much on a quick notice, recognizing there'll be a skeleton staff on site, but that people need to understand that themselves or their alternates need to be available for immediate return to the office to address these inspectional needs. I can tell you, as somebody who used to call firms because of illnesses, tamperings, and other issues at 11 o'clock on a Saturday night, calling the president of the firm, telling them we'll be at their site at midnight, they were able to pull together teams to get in to enable FDA to conduct inspections, understanding that not every person is going to be there, but enough to be able to host the inspection. So again, you need to be responsive. They understand it's vacation time, but if you're in business, you're expected to be operational and have the level of oversight needed. A team of investigators shows up to conduct a pre-announced device inspection, so it's a routine QSIT inspection of some sort. One investigator who has the notice of inspection, the FDA 482, gets lost on the way to the firm and arrives late. The investigators want to begin the inspection before his arrival. So what do? Do you permit them to start that inspection? Do you allow them to begin their inspection while the late investigator arrives with the 482? How do you handle those situations? And these happen more commonly than you may think. Our guidance is, and the way the statute is written, no inspection starts before a notice of inspection is issued. The Act specifically states that the agency must issue a notice of inspection before beginning any inspection. Anything they collect that's not covered under a notice of inspection cannot be used. It's not evidence. It's nothing they can use in support of any action against your firm. They can, on their own, initiate a new notice of inspection for the investigators that are there, however, and then modify by issuing the second notice of inspection when the last investigator arrives. In the best of all worlds, your best situation is to please sit them in a conference room, offer them a cup of coffee until the last investigator arrives if they chose not to issue a new notice of inspection. But do not allow them to begin inspections before that notice of inspection is issued to top management at the firm. Another inspection scenario that has come up is upon initiating an inspection, the investigator gave the firm a choice. They could take full notes with use of a scribe in the room where he was sitting, and he would stick to simply citing the regulations, or when he finds something without any discussion, or not having a scribe and only take notes on document requests, and he would have an open discussion as the inspection progresses. He claims he needs to protect himself and doesn't want the world to see what he says. How do you proceed? There are no more than a couple of 3 investigators who play this game. We always encourage our clients to use that scribe. There should be nothing that there should be anything ashamed of that scribe shouldn't be able to cover. You're entitled to have that scribe to memorialize the discussion and the conversation and what issues were identified in that front room. We always encourage firms to continue forward with the scribe. If he's concerned about what he has to say, there's a reason for it. So you politely say, we appreciate that and thank you. We hope you're forthcoming, but we have chosen to continue to use the Scribe option to memorialize the inspection should any questions arise at some later date. Another scenario that comes up, this was a very unusual one that we dealt with. During an inspection, simply to verify the effectiveness of a sub-recall, so it was just a check to see whether you got notification of a particular recall and that you followed the instructions in the recall notification at a distributor. An FDA investigator refused to wait in the conference room while the female contact, the female person who was honchoing the inspection on behalf of the distributor, went to retrieve her records with regard to the recall. He refused to wait in the conference room and followed her to the women's restroom. When he heard people talking in the restroom, he grew suspicious of what who this woman was talking to and what she was talking about. And he literally opened the lady's room door, went inside, and told the employer she is not permitted to speak with anyone or use her cell phone. Needless to say, this prompted a very prompt complaint filed with FDA. Needless to say that this inspection was terminated immediately. But what should you as the employee do? Should you forgive such an egregious act? How should the company respond? What actions should you take when these kind of situations arise, which can be somewhat of a challenge in the immediate sense? First and foremost, again, going back to the agency's intent that these investigators be polite, they be courteous, they be respectful. A man walking into a restroom to challenge a female employee is not filling any of those roles. Secondly, she's entitled to speak to whoever she would like to, and he can't stop her from using a cell phone in front of him, in the restroom, or anywhere. He does not have that authority. So he way overstepped his bounds. We obviously filed a formal complaint with the agency, and as far as we know it, we believe that investigator is no longer with the agency based upon the response that we got. But it does put your employee in a very challenging situation as to how to deal with these things. You really need to just step back, look at it reasonably, don't hesitate to escalate where it's appropriate. But escalate in the normal chain of command. Don't try to overstep the chain of custody or chain of command at FDA. This individual supervisor and district director were able to handle it very efficiently and effectively. This inspection was terminated. There was apologies written, and this kind of behavior should not be tolerated. An investigator identified a potential 483 observation during an inspection at your firm. He approaches you with a, quote, management commitment to correct, a document that he's created for your signature, promising that if it's signed, the items will not be included on the FDA 483. Do you sign that management commitment to correct just to eliminate that 483? We were confronted with this first time a number of years ago by a client who, after they signed the first one, wanted to know if they should continue to sign them. There is no such document as a management commitment to correct. This is something that was fabricated by this particular investigator. Interestingly, we just had another client with a very similar situation within the last few weeks that was asked to as well sign a similar document, that if you sign this commitment, we won't include it on the 483. Don't sign them and let the item appear on the 483. You have the opportunity to respond to the 483 in an open forum, and that you have the ability to provide whatever objective evidence you have to refute the 483 or to make the changes necessary to address the 483. The management commitment to correct really has no standing. I have made the agency aware of these situations. For whatever reason, I understand the reasons. Manufacturers are afraid to formally complain that they've been approached with these, but the agency is aware of a few investigators, and they are hoping that the industry does come forward because they would like to deal with it more aggressively and deal with the specific investigators who we can't quite share unless we get permission to do so. But in speaking with the agency, it's interesting how their approach was, well, if they signed it, it has no bearing anyhow, it doesn't mean anything, and the firm gets away with the 483. We believe that probably would not stand up at some point. We'd rather see you take the 483 item, address it appropriately, make the corrections that are necessary, and be transparent and upfront about it, than to sign a document that really has no standing with the agency. Another inspection scenario, the firm decides to decline signing that management commitment to correct, and this actually is how the first situation that was brought to my attention actually played out. The investigator advises management that he has all the time in the world to sit in the conference room and wait until they decide to sign the document. And this was after they had signed the first one and didn't know if they should continue to sign them. And this investigator literally plopped himself down in the conference room and waited and waited and waited. And finally, around 9 o'clock at night, they basically, after they contacted us, we basically told them that you're way beyond the normal business hours. Just tell him you're going home and you're closing down. And he can wait all he wants, but he's not going to be waiting in a closed, locked building, and that he needed to leave at that time. Again, this is overreaching his authority initially, just with the management commitment to correct, no less. I have all the time in the world till you sign it. Not going to happen. Put the lid on it early on. They don't need to hold you over a barrel to try to force your arm to sign these documents. They're really way over the top in far-reaching their authorities. So again, you sometimes need to be polite but forceful and remind the investigator what his scope of his responsibilities are, his ability to inspect during normal business hours, reasonable times, and at 10 o'clock at 9 and 10 o'clock at night after being there at 8 and 9 in the morning is not a reasonable time. So again, a scenario that approached became a ticklish situation and one that hopefully will not repeat itself. This next scenario does happen, however, more frequently than the others, in that during a tour of the manufacturing operation, the investigator decides to question the line operators. And line operators are often very nervous when they hear FDA is on site. They realize many of them are just doing manual tasks. Many of them feel very uncomfortable when FDA walks through and tours the site while they're doing their work. One operator in particular is visibly nervous and does not respond to the investigator's direct questions easily, and his responses are not completely accurate. The investigator claims the operator is not trained and is possibly hiding information, and in fact implied perhaps there's a criminal issue behind all of this. How do you respond to those situations? As I said, these happen more often than not when an investigator will all of a sudden randomly ask a line operator, why are you doing something? How are you doing something? Why is this being done? And it's sometimes outside the scope of their knowledge or their purview. Sometimes, these guys, the line operators who are hourly employees are really being challenged in trying to deal with somebody who they think is of unquestionable authority. And it does create a situation where sometimes you need to backtrack a story that they shared to get everything back into a box. We've had one situation not too long ago at a firm where this same situation happened. The investigator required management to provide Title 18 training to all their employees so that they understood any false statements to the government could be considered in a criminal manner. There are times when you make that employee available off the line on a one-on-one where they're not distracted, and they probably will do a lot better with the FDA investigator. Also, they will not be distracted. That could result in a product recall because they're not doing the job they're supposed to do. These people sometimes don't know the big picture. The problem is when an employee, an operator tells the FDA one thing, you tell the FDA something else, and then when they re-interview the person, they get the same story as you're portraying, and they're wondering, are they lying? Have they changed their story because you coerced or forced them to do so? And that's where the situation gets a little bit more ticklish from an FDA perspective. But it's important that your employees understand that these investigators these men and women are really there just to do fact-finding. They're not there to trip anybody up. I understand it's easy to say they shouldn't be nervous, but you can anticipate they will. Doing mock audits helps with that. Doing mock audits, going through your facility, having these people answer random questions to a person who's unknown to them does help them become more comfortable. But sometimes it's just simple open-ended questions that get to them, such as why are you doing something? How often do you have problems? And they don't know how to address that. What do you mean by a problem? A really big problem, or are you talking about, I have difficulty doing a particular process, or it's a challenge? So these are the kind of scenarios that can be challenging. You should continue to speak to your operators, make them more comfortable that when these situations arise, they need to be prepared for them. And, you may have to try to intervene at some point to make sure that your stories are in sync, not to lie, but to make sure that your stories are in sync so that everybody's delivering a consistent message. During a tour of the manufacturing facility, the investigator takes out his smartphone and begins taking pictures with no explanation. How do you respond? Do you permit him to take pictures, and if so, how do you prevent the action? So if you have a policy of no photographs and you've articulated that during your opening meeting, they should be respectful of that. No photographs means no photographs. There's a little bit more latitude to the agency recently under the Drug Security Act for pharmaceuticals under the delay, refuse, and deny inspection guidance that came out. But again, that's limited to pharmaceuticals, and really that is still being tested with the agency and with the field organization as well. So how do you permit him to take pictures? Many firms, many clients I have that policy. They don't permit pictures, and yet they'll say, okay, you can take that picture. Arguably, they're going against their own policy, and he can write you up for that, or she can write you up for that. Sometimes it's worth having them take that photograph of a label rather than having them sit there and try to sketch it or have them write down all the information in that label. But take another picture immediately behind them, or you take the picture and provide them a copy. Either which way works. What's more concerning is that this individual used his or her own personal smartphone. That is a potential problem today with social media as it is. You can all of a sudden find those photographs on some website, on some Snapchat, on some Twitter site, on some Pinterest site that you do not obviously want there. They should not be using any personal equipment other than a pen when they come in to do your inspections. If they want to take photos and you've agreed to photos, there are government-issued cameras that will provide them the ability to do so that the government controls and has oversight over. So again, no pictures means no pictures, and they certainly should not be using their own personal equipment to take those pictures, such as their own smartphone. Because as we all know today, there's a lot of information on the social media that probably can be rather embarrassing to a lot of people, and you don't want your firm to be out there with everybody else. During the review of files during an inspection, the investigator states she does not want paper documents and would like to have all materials delivered to her in electronic format. Your facility does not maintain documents in electronic format and does not have the capability of immediately providing documents in electronic format. Is this request acceptable, and what actions do you take to respond? So, more and more documents, fewer and fewer firms maintaining paper documentation, and it's only natural that investigators in today's day and age, with the advent of computers, data files, et cetera, are going to be asking for more and more documentation as you store it in electronic format. So it's not necessarily outrageous for them to be asking for that. If they're simply asking for a scanned copy of your paper documents, you should be able to produce those, or downloading them onto a jump drive or a CD. But you should not have to create electronic databases to accommodate her request, as there's no reason for you to create anything for them. When they ask for a specific electronic report for something that you currently have, and they only want three portions of that report that you ordinarily has 8 or 9, you shadow the remaining 6 or 5 that they're not asking for. You only provide information that they ask for. You only be responsive to the questions that they ask, and don't volunteer or share information that they haven't asked for. So again, if they're looking at an Excel file and they said, I just want the name of the firm, I want the name of the product, I want to know the date it was produced, the slot number, and how many were issued, and your Excel file also includes complaints and other issues, you only provide them what they want and eliminate those extra lists. You don't want to give them anything that they have not asked for. It's not to say they're not entitled to it, but if they haven't asked for it, you don't need to provide it to them. So again, what do they mean by electronic format? Do they want it just scanned and downloaded, or do they want you to create electronic databases to be able to store records that you don't have? You do not have to do that, but it's not unreasonable today to scan documents, provide them in a different electronic format for them, so that they, frankly, will slice and dice that data and to see if there are any patterns or trends that you might have missed or are not taking a look at that point. So remember, you only provide them what they ask for. You only tell an inspector. You only be responsive to the questions that they ask. So that's very important. The next scenario is during the course of the inspection, you note the investigator has yelled at several of your employees and told them they were incompetent. Similarly, the investigator has yelled at members of your inspection team when he has not gotten what he asked for in a timely manner. How do you handle, how do you handle those situations? Sometimes there's a lot of frustration that takes place during these inspections. It's your chance to get this inspection back into a box. Again, reminder about that professional behavior, the courtesy, the respect. If it's a one investigator team, then you need to sit that investigator down in a closed room and say, look, we treat you with respect. We expect the same in return. There's no reason for you to yell or scream at any of our employees. There's no reason for you to demand things that are unreasonable. If you feel we're not being responsive to your requests in a timely manner, just let us know, and we'll do our best to achieve that. But unless we see a change in pattern in your behavior, you do escalate. Now, if there's a team of investigators there and there's one particular investigator in charge, you make that person aware of it and ask them to please get the offensive investigator under control. And if that still doesn't work, then you escalate to the district director at the district from where these investigators come. There's no reason, again, polite, friendly, cordial, respectful manner. These people are supposed to be professional in the way they deal with industry, and it'll be those rare instances where something like this may escalate to the point that it has. Hopefully, it certainly doesn't continue. An investigator is conducting an inspection at your firm and he decides he'd like to check the HVAC filters, your air conditioning system, which are located in the roof of the building. He returns to his car to obtain tools to begin the disassembly of the unit. What do you do? Stop him. First of all, the agency would certainly not want him dismantling your HVAC system only for the potential to break it and be stuck with the bill associated with its repair. More importantly, though, is you don't want him touching your HVAC system in case it will affect the products that are being manufactured. It may require recalibrations, revalidations. It may require other environmental tests that need to be done. You do not want him to do that, and you basically tell him it's off limits. He's entitled to review your files for filter replacement. He's entitled to know how the unit's been maintained. He's entitled to know if there have been any downtimes. He's entitled to know how do you deal with these situations during a blackout. He's entitled to know everything about that HVAC system and how you deal with those situations. But no, he's not entitled to go up to your roof, not only liability of him potentially falling, but he's not allowed to dismantle your system. He's not allowed to pull your filters. He's not allowed to do any of that. An agency clearly does not want him doing or her doing that as well. When that situation arose, I called, at the time, the Associate Commissioner for Regulatory Affairs, who I was very friendly with, and asked him what he thought of that because, if it breaks, I hope they were prepared to pay for it. And to which he said, "Oh, my God, don't tell me they're doing that." So that is a no-no. Again, they don't want responsibilities. They don't want those liabilities that may come with that. And this is clearly a rogue investigator out there. Another scenario is an investigator's requested records that are being stored off-site at a record storage facility. The investigator stated after 15 minutes that it's taking entirely too long to obtain the records, and he has indicated he will consider this a delay or as a refusal of inspection. What do you do? So, again, 15 minutes is not exactly a reasonable period of time, and hopefully in your opening presentation you have made it clear that those documents that are archived and stored off-site are going to take time to retrieve. For those of you, again, as a reminder, have negotiated lower-cost contracts where retrieval doesn't have to occur fairly quickly, within a day or two, this can become a big miss for you during an inspection. The agency will not wait 4, 5, 6, 10 days to get records to review. These inspections are supposed to be ongoing. They're supposed to be prompt. Certainly a few-day period, that's fine. Anything more than that, you really need to consider renegotiating those contracts with your archival company. If those records, however, are electronic records, there's no reason that you shouldn't be able to produce them fairly quickly. They're on your website. They're on your system. And if they're at a sister site that's also available electronically, you should be able to access them fairly quickly as well. I think the 15 minutes is way too short a period of time to have that expectation. But that being said, you should anticipate when an investigator starts its inspection, he's going to want to see all your procedures. They should be available immediately. He's going to want to see all your work instructions. He's going to want to see all your policies. He's going to want to see your list of open CAPAs, list of open recalls, your complaint files. He's going to want to see those kind of records, or she's going to want to see those kind of records immediately. And those should be readily retrievable. It's when it starts getting into full CAPA records and full documentation and historical data, those are the kind of things where, you tell them, you set the expectations during your opening presentation, and that you make them available as quickly as possible thereafter. Again, a reminder for those who do have contracts, make sure that they would satisfy that of an investigator during an inspection. This scenario involves a product clearance, and that you recently had a 510K pre-market notification clear for the wonderful widget device after several rounds of submissions to FDA in response to questions raised during review. During the next inspection, the investigator said he does not agree with CDRH's clearance or any of the data that were reviewed by the Office of Device Evaluation that had served as the basis of the 510K clearance. The investigator implies the device should not be marketed. How do you handle? Again, you ask the investigator what the basis of his or her rationale is, and then advise them that you have clearance to lawfully market the device based upon information that was shared with the agency. He or she does not have the authority over pre-market clearances or PMAs or de novo devices, etc. He or she can collect information and share with CDRH, who has the responsibility to review that data. And if he or she is concerned about information that you had provided to the agency, or concerned about the device that they ultimately cleared, he needs to work that through the Office of Device Evaluation. And you as well offer the opportunity that we will further discuss that with ODE if they have a concern. This is outside his scope of expertise. However, he is instructed to collect that information, especially if there are any concerns. So he should not be telling you to stop marketing the device. He should be collecting information to address his concerns and sharing that with the experts at CDRH, likely in the Office of Device Evaluation or Office of In Vitro Products, and they will make a determination as to whether or not there's something that was missed, something that they weren't aware of, something where they may have made an error, or he or she is again off on their own and there is no basis for their concerns. But they should not be telling you that the device should not be marketed. That's beyond the scope of their responsibilities and their level of expertise and outside their wheelhouse. At the conclusion of the inspection, the investigator advises management he would like to receive a draft response to the 483 for his review and comment before it's submitted to the agency. Do you comply? Your response to the agency should be going to his or her supervisor or compliance officer or district director. He or she will likely be on the next inspection before you submit your response within 15 working days of the 483 that's issued. It's important that your response stand on its own, though, because whoever's going to be reviewing that response, your audience, has not been at your firm, and they really need to understand what is going on at your firm. So you really should have that review reviewed by an independent set of eyes to make sure it makes sense. So you do not need to accommodate his request for a draft copy or his opportunity to review your response. Similarly, the same investigator advises he wants the response to the FDA submitted within 15 calendar days of the completion of the inspection, not 15 business days. He acknowledges the agency's time frame, which I might add was published in the Federal Register, but states he doesn't follow that time frame. Well, you do, and you make it clear to him that you understand what you are obligated to. You have a full 15 business days, not including holidays, to submit your response. I would suggest to you do not get brownie points for submitting it early, especially if that early response is not sufficient. You take the full 15 days, vet it appropriately, and make sure that it's submitted within 15 days, not 16 days, for the agency to consider your response in their determination of an enforcement action going forward. Take that full time frame if you're entitled to it. We're going to quickly go through these are some things never to say to an investigator. 20 things that you should never say during an inspection. You should never say, I think. You should know. You shouldn't portray it as, well, it's iffy. I don't really know. You should be very firm in your suspicions. I am not sure. You should be sure. Don't preface your statement with, I am not sure. Just tell it as it is. I told them not to do it this way. Resist the temptation to throw your colleagues or your firm under the bus. That does not set up for a good environment for you going forward or for your firm that you're representing. Resist that temptation to be able to say, these guys have no idea what they're doing. Resist the temptation to tell the investigator you are wrong about this. You don't know what you are talking about. I'm not saying the investigators always do know what they're talking about, but don't tell them they don't know what they're talking about. Just say, thank you, we appreciate your concerns, we appreciate your comments, we'll take them under advisement, and we will consider them, but we have thought this out rather clearly. We will clearly look at that going forward. During the last inspection, the FDA investigator saw the same thing, didn't put it on the 483. Two wrongs don't make a right. The fact that the last investigator didn't put it on the 483 has no bearing on what this investigator may do. This investigator may have a different sweet spot in what they look at than the last investigator. Things might not have exactly been the same as the last investigator. Don't try to pin it on the last investigator as being incompetent or that this investigator is being unreasonable. The last investigator was crazy, or the last investigator did not know what they were doing. Not a good tone to set with the investigator. These guys are part of an organization. They may or may not even know the last investigator, but disparaging them in that way really doesn't do anybody any good. You just sort of go with the flow, and you may say something about, well, we had that discussion with the last investigator, or we appreciate your concerns, but again, don't throw that last investigator under the bus. It's really not going to do you any good. How would you recommend we fix this deficiency? Well, FDA is not there to be your consultant. You're expected to know how to fix this deficiency. You're supposed to have the expertise. It's your product. It's your processes. They are not there to consult, so don't expect them to tell you that, and quite frankly, the agency doesn't want them to tell you that, because if it's not correct, they now are held accountable for what mess you may have created by following their recommendation, and they can be held liable. That was the way we've always done it. Not a good answer. The answer doesn't make it any better, the fact that you've always been not compliant with what they believe is a potential deviation from the regulations or the act. I probably shouldn't say this, but, again, bad start to a sentence, sets you up. The investigator starts to befriend you. Before you know it, it's a real slippery slope. Really don't throw anybody under that bus. Stay up front. Stay proud of what you do. Remember, you are the voice of your firm. You need to proudly represent it going forward. If we followed these procedures, we'd never get anything done. Well, that just opened the Pandora's box for FDA to ask anything that you've been doing. What procedures do you follow? What's the value of those procedures? Why aren't you following your procedures, and why are those procedures inadequate? So we don't want to go down that road. Although we certainly know, and have all had experiences with people who have said our procedures are antiquated, they're worthless, they're this. We certainly don't want to share that with the FDA, and you do have the responsibility to make sure your procedures are up to date. We don't have enough people or time to review all these complaints. That becomes a management review issue as well, because then you don't have adequate resources, as well as not doing adequate investigations and review of incoming complaints. So you don't want to state we don't have enough people. It just grows your problems at your firm. It just gives them fodder for another observation. Beyond complaint management, it now says management does not have adequate resources in place to address all the quality issues that need to be addressed. The management of this firm is only concerned with profits and doesn't take quality seriously. While that may be the case in many firms, and I've certainly been at many where that is the case, you don't really want to share that with FDA. You don't really want to go forward with FDA in that tone. It's just going to make things a lot worse for you and for your company. And, FDA will take that as a tacit implication that quality is of no value, quality isn't important at the firm, and there are bigger fish, bigger issues to address at the firm that they need to dig into. I do it this way because our procedures do not make any sense, sort of like the other one where if I followed these procedures, I'd never get anything done. It is your firm's responsibility to make sure your procedures are accurate, they're current, they're usable, they're user-friendly, and that they are able to produce a safe and effective product. I'll change the procedure right away. Well, while the intent is nice, you should have change control procedures. You can't simply change the procedure right away with a stroke of a pen. You need to go through a full, thorough review process. We'll take that suggestion under advisement. We will take the necessary steps to review the procedures we see appropriately and follow our procedures to get it cleared. If you think that's bad, you should see this. Again, a common term that can get you further and dig you further into a hole. We fix the problem by firing the person. Well, there may be situations where firing people may be appropriate. That doesn't fix the problem. That just gets rid of the person who was doing it. If there is a problem, there's a procedure that's not adequate, if there's a problem within the manufacturing facility itself, you need to address that. People who may have ignored it should probably be fired, or people who've created procedures that weren't appropriate maybe, but you don't fix the problem by firing people. You only fix the problem by fixing the problem and not by firing the people. That's not my fault. There's a previous person who did that. Well, you're there now, and you inherited it. Previous person who did that may have been responsible. They're no longer there. Sure, there's a certain honeymoon period that's associated with your taking over, but it doesn't last forever. It may not be your fault, but it's your issue to resolve and to address. That's not my problem. It's quality assurance's problem. Well, quality is everybody's problem. Quality is everybody owns quality. It's everybody's job. So to the extent it might not be your problem, it's your responsibility to make quality aware of it and share that responsibility and make them aware of a problem that you've identified so that it can be fixed and addressed. write it on the 483, the only way we'll correct it. And we all know, probably work at firms where that culture may be the case, that only those things that are actually pointed out by FDA. But I wouldn't tell FDA to do that. That's really not, don't forget those 483s of public information. The longer the 483, the more difficult it is to convince your competitors and other customers that you have less of a problem that you may have. So don't encourage FDA to write it on the 483. Take the necessary steps culturally to make the change to address those problems. And then are you going to shut us down, or are we going to get a warning letter? These are two questions that you don't ask an investigator. First of all, they don't make those decisions. Their higher-ups do, their supervisors, compliance officers, et cetera. But it sort of sounds like you've gotten the message that things are rather dire at your firm, and that might not be where you want to be. So I thank you. I'd like to take the opportunity to have some questions if time is available. And again, feel free to reach out to me individually if you have any questions after today's webinar.
Thank you, Steve. So much good information. We're going to now begin the Q&A session. If you have a question, please feel free to submit it using the Q&A panel located at the bottom right of your screen. After typing your questions in the space at the bottom, hit the send button. Please be sure to direct your questions to all panelists in the Ask menu. Your questions will not be seen by other members of the audience. And it looks like we had at least a few people that have already done that. Steve, the first question is, how do these pointers fit in, if at all, with FDA's intention to inspect according to risk? Does that make you amend your advice at all, or do you think these are all just as valuable given the FDA's new program?
No, absolutely. I mean, they are all the same. What I've shared today are potential issues that can arise regardless of what FDA is going to focus on. Risk is always the big factor from an FDA inspection, their risk prioritization scheme for developing these risk-based models. Those are going to continue. As resources get scarcer and scarcer, they're going to be spending more and more time at the riskier firms, those that produce the riskier products. But the risk-based inspectional protocols, all of what I shared today is just really common sense. It applies to whatever is being inspected at any given time. They can come in and do the most innocuous inspection in the world, and you can make it worse by making a disparaging remark to the investigator, or the investigator could be having a miserable day and make your life miserable. So, I don't think it really has any impact at all.
Great, thank you. Next question. What would you advise a company to say to an investigator that says that they have to find something or they're not doing their job?
Yeah, I would tell them that if we don't have anything, you don't need to find anything. I want to remind people that literally 49%, so that's almost 50% of all inspections FDA conducts are NAI, no action indicated. That means no 483 was issued. That's a pretty staggeringly large number given the volume of inspections the FDA conducts in a year. So roughly half of the inspections get no observations. So I don't buy that argument. If there are no observations, there's no reason for them to fabricate it. And in fact, my guess is, because I know I would have been interested to hear that, if we escalated that up, there would be a lot of interest as to who would ever have said that. There's got to be, if there's no findings, there are no findings. If there are findings, only significant findings belong on a 483. Other findings may be communicated as suggestions, opportunities for improvement, recommendations. But if you look at the language on the 483, it's only those significant observations, so they shouldn't be making up anything.
Thank you. That's great advice. Looks like we have time for one more, and this is sort of a general question, but always a good one. How often are companies audited, and what determines their likelihood of being audited or inspected?
So there are a lot of variables going on right now. The statute used to be for pharmaceuticals and medical devices that all Class 2 and 3 medical devices had to be inspected every other year. They have hardly met that statutory requirement. And similarly for pharmaceutical companies, a 2-year reinspection pattern. For Deja, the FDA Safety and Innovation Act, which was the last reauthorization bill, changed that for drugs. They took that requirement out of the statute and made a risk-based model. And that's what the case for quality, the critical quality attributes are addressing, in that as you share more information with the agency on a voluntary basis based on how your devices and drugs are doing in the marketplace, they will evaluate that and make a resource decision as to how often you need to be inspected. If they're comfortable with what you have in place and the quality system that you have in place, they may inspect you less frequently than they had in the past. Remember, conformance to the quality system regulation or the CGMP for drugs and biologics, those are baselines. Their goal is to get you operating above those baselines. They want you, when I played on the case of quality for devices, if you think of it as Olympic medals, they wanted you operating not at the baseline, but at the gold and bronze and silver levels. They wanted you above and beyond just the baseline, and that increased their confidence in what you're doing, and as a result, they would spend less time at your firm. Resources are getting slimmer for the agency. They anticipate they will continue to get slimmer, and they will need to cover the landscape in a more efficient manner, sharing and harmonizing with European and Asian counterparts to share inspectional information so that there is a reduction in the redundancy of inspections by the different regulatory bodies. Will also assist in the number of re-inspections the FDA will conduct.
Great, thank you so much. It looks like that's about all the time we have for questions. I just want to thank Steve. I don't think there's a more qualified individual who could give you this real-world, crucial advice for all of our drug and device companies. So thank you, Steve. It's really crucial information, and we all appreciate it.
Thank you. Appreciate it. And again, if anybody has individual questions, you have my contact information at the beginning of the PowerPoint presentation.